Alright, as you can see, I have graded your midterms, and they're back. Basically, I made copies for each and every one of you, and those scores have also been put into inside Rankin. Alright, so with some of you that resulted in a grade change, and by and large it was a good thing, not a bad thing. So again, grading these, I wanted to make sure that you all created the 4 different array lists. Everybody did. I will tell you that with a couple of you, and again, this is no slam, but I just want to make sure you know this. You know, when you start writing an app and somebody runs it for the first time, if you tell them please enter a number between 1 and 9 and you don't tell them what it means, they're probably going to be very confused. Alright, so you really should have done something where you put all the different options that were in there. You didn't just say, do a 1 through 9. With a couple of you, and I tried to show you this in class, if you got dinged a little bit, I didn't want repetitive code. That's why I showed you that example in class where every kind of object, regardless of which of the 4 types it was, had fields in common. First name, middle initial, last name, union status, employee number, etc. So I expected that material to be put in there only once. If you put it in there more than once, it was repetitive code. And I've mentioned this to you before, we wanted to follow the principles of dry, which is do not repeat yourself. So you may have lost some points for that. All right. I tried to put notes in there if I took off for anything to let you know why I took off. All right. For some of you in here, I would enter the information. It let me enter it just fine. And then when I went to print it out, either there was nothing there or there were zeros there or whatever. With 1 or 2 groups, when I tried to run after I put in the values, even if I put in all valid values, the program blew up or the program locked up. All right. What I was looking for on the back page here, now 1 or 2 groups didn't do these extra exceptions that you were asked to do. There should have been a total of 7 exceptions. The 2 that we did as a class, 2 here, 2 here, or 2, 2, 2, and 1. All right. So if all you did was the ones that that we had to begin with, you got 12 points, but you lost the rest of the points. All right. It's always interesting when I have you do some grading of yourselves, and I know that can be an uncomfortable thing to do. But I think, at least in one of the groups, if not 2 of them, people were much harder on themselves than they were on their partner. All right, and to me, it didn't matter if in Luke's group, if Luke typed in all of the code or didn't type, because you had a lot of the code given to you anyway. All right, basically what you were working on was setting up the program.cs, setting up the main. So if one person typed, fine. If you took turns, fine. But the idea was that you would both be commenting as you were going along. And if one person saw something, you thought maybe that's not right, all right, you would have talked about it with the other person. All right. The final 40 points, most people got most of the points. But again, if you did not follow one of the instructions above, you might have lost 5 or more points. Does all that make sense? All right. And I mentioned for those of you who just got in, I did not ask. I got an email from Brock saying his students were complaining about some of the machines and their positions, so he placed those 4 up here. I don't like this at all. All right. I think it's very hard for anybody, John and Chase, etc., and John back there to see. All right, and if he asks me today, that's what I'm going to tell him. But technically, this is a hardware room. It's not our room. All right, maybe that's unfair, but that's just the way it is. All right. So let's see. I'm not, if you want, we can go over it, but most of you did a really good job on this. All right. I was very pleased by and large with how people did. Now, I do want to mention a couple things. First of all, we are, as mentioned, we're going to go over Chapter 12. We're going to go over Chapter 13. We're going to go over Chapter 14 this week. We're going to do this differently in that we're going to go over Chapter 12 today and the review questions, as we have been doing. And again, the review questions will be worth 25 points. Then tomorrow when we start, we're going to do a program from Chapter 12. I don't know which one yet because I haven't done it. And then we're going to go over Chapter 13. And we're going to do the review questions. And then Wednesday, we're going to go over a program from Chapter 13. And then do Chapter 14 and the review questions. Thursday, we'll do a program from Chapter 14. There will not be a written test on 12, 13, or 14. And in lieu of giving you tests, I'm going to require that we do these programs, these three, as a class. And that'll finish up this book. So when you come in here a week from today, whether you bring the book or don't bring the book is totally up to you. But you won't need the book anymore for the rest of the semester. Does all that make sense? All right. Let's see. All right, so I am going to go over Chapter 12 right now. I don't have my book with me. I don't think that's going to be any kind of an issue. So I am on page 535. If, as we go over this, if you say, we've done a lot of this stuff already, that's why I'm not going to give you a test on it, because I introduced much of the material that's in here earlier in the book. All right? So, for instance, when you look in here, and I'm not going to read any of this to you. We may not have talked about font, but you know what colors are. All right? You know what checkboxes are. You know what radio buttons are. We've used them a little bit in here, but we've used them a lot in the last semester. All right? A picture box is a way that you can add images to a form if you want to. All right? We've talked about list boxes. I've shown you those. I've shown you combo boxes, all right? And date pickers you probably have seen already, but you're going to see all this stuff. I also showed you menus, which again is why I decided not to sit there and give you a test on these three chapters. All right. So the author talks in here on the next page on 536 about graphical control elements. I mean, why do you create them? Because people like to look at pictures more than they like to read text. Many of you may have found throughout the semester, especially when we did the class stuff, the object-oriented programming stuff, it was much easier to understand. It was more intuitive to just do things that were console-based. All right, and considering the fact that class files don't have any controls in them, that's why we did it that way. All right. But by and large, when people create programs, they want them to be graphical. All right? Okay. Controls, widgets, doesn't matter what you call it. All right? And, a couple things that are in here. They mention, that controls, it says they're also marshaled by ref objects. It's not that important a thing. All right? The author gives a lot of information in here. And I'm not saying that it's bad information. It's not at all. But when you look through it, sometimes it's kind of overkill. All right? So, it says here, Table 12.1 shows the 26 direct descendants of control. So these are the different things that you can basically build. So all controls are descendants of the control class. All right. Again, I'm not going to read any of this to you. All right. And if you look, there's more even on the next page here. All right. Now it says, because they're all relatives, they share many of the same attributes. You may have noticed this. You may not have noticed this. But if you put a bunch of controls on the screen, I don't care if they're the same kind of control or different controls, and then you lasso them or you draw that invisible square around them, what you'll notice if you go into the properties window is there'll still be a bunch of properties, but not as many as you had before. Those are all the properties that are in common between all controls. So we've worked with back color. Rather than using a background color, you can use an image. Typically, people don't use an image unless it's a fairly light colored image because it can detract from the way the app looks. People are concentrating on the image and not what the app is supposed to do. All right. They talk a little bit about dragging and dropping in here also. And again, there's more things on 539. My hope is that you will take the time to at least very quickly look through these different classes on pages 538 and 539. And if there's something that you don't understand in them, you will ask. All right, 538 are the classes. 539 are the associated properties. 540 has got more properties. Now they go through here next on 541. It says examining the IDE's automatically generated code. You may have noticed this already. You may not have. But every time you put something on the screen, not only is it going to be written to your your form1.cs file, but there's a form1. I don't remember what it's called, resx or something like that. There's a bunch of internal files that get created and that get written to as well. All right. Maybe you've seen this before. Maybe you have not. I know we've talked about this before. So if I go in here and I say File, New, Project, I call it junk because that's what it'll be. And I'll bet you it's going to make, yeah, I don't want that. So if I come in here and I create a new Windows Form project, and I get this, and I come in here and I'm just going to throw a couple controls on here. I know you've seen this kind of thing already. This is nothing new. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to throw a button on here. All right. Then I come in and I double click the button. Notice right now the name of the button is button 1. Nothing new there. But I double click on it. Then I turn around and I say, I forgot to change this. All right. So I come back in here and I change the name. I change it from button 1 to, let's just say, button exit. And then I put the text on here to exit. You already know this. If I double click right here, it still says button 1. You know this. We've talked about this before. What you may or may not know of, if you take a look on the screen, is this form1.resx file. This is something that gets created by the system. All right. There's a couple files. There's a resx and there's a designer file right here that get created. We looked at these at the beginning of the semester, and one thing I told you was don't jack with those. They're system files. All right. But the main reason, when you take a look in here, someplace in here, there you go. Notice now it's been changed to button exit. It has been changed there. But again, when we go back to here, it has not been changed. These two are not in accordance with one another. All right? That's why you want to always go back and click here and click on that lightning bolt. Go back to where it says button 1 click. Remove that. Now notice when I double click, it says button exit. And the point of this is, though, it's very easy for your form1.cs and your form1.designer.cs files to get out of whack with one another. And if they do, really bad things can happen. All right, the program can work fine for a long time and all of a sudden one day just lock up and not work. Now, one of the things they get into in this chapter, just so you know this, if you think about it, we've been doing this. If I told you right now, I'm not, but if I told you right now to come in here and build an interface, you could all build it in a minute. All right? But it is also possible that we could leave our interface blank and you could build the interface in code. So if I wanted to, I could say something like, if I in here I could say button exit equals new button. We could do that and build it like that also. It's not normally done that way. But if we wanted to, we could build an entire application like this. Who cares? Well, first of all, there is a lot of code out there that where it is done like that. And second of all, it brings into mind the stuff we've been doing with object orientation. The type, the name, instantiate that type. All right? And they go through that in here and they talk about it with a lot of different types of controls. The author comes in and talks to you about setting your own font. Now, again, you all know this. If I come through here and I go down to font, let's grab a different thing, grab a text view, I think would work better. Text box. All right, so if I go over here and then I go up, down, whatever, to font, you can see the different types of fonts we have. Again, there's nothing big right here, nothing you haven't already seen before, other than when you think about it, what's not in there. For example, Google fonts. All right. If you want to go and bring a Google font into a program like this and be able to use it, you can do that. But when you do that, you can set up your own type of font. You need to download that font. But when you do it, you basically, if you don't want one of these, you've got to set it up like this. All right. The other advantage of doing this is I can set my fonts up in one place and tell every place else to use this. Okay? Everybody knows what the stuff in here too. They call them font style enumerations, bolding, italicizing, etc. You get regular by default, etc. Nothing big in there. Setting a controls font, they go through an exercise where they have you do it. All right. All right. One control we never really talked about was a link label. So if you look up on the screen here, if I go, there's a link label. If I go and put it there, there it is. So what is it? It's a label that holds a hyperlink. That's all it is. All right. That may not be that important now. That's something we may very well come back to next semester. They give an example in here as well. Adding color to a form, you all know about the background colors. All right. As it says, the color class contains a wide variety of predefined colors. Most of them are shown here. All right. You can also go in and create your own. The key thing is when you start working with colors, that's what you have to do. So notice if I wanted to set the background color for a label named label 1, you use this dot label 1 dot back color, then it's system dot drawing dot color. Now that's if you're going to use the built-in colors. So they again show you the designer file in here. So when you start making changes, you can see how it's changed. I'm taking for granted, I do understand James was not in the class last semester, but that you all look at these and that makes sense to all of you. That you all understand the check boxes, that you all understand the radio buttons. And for check boxes, again, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those can be selected. Radio buttons, only one of those can be selected. All right? I don't know why, but it's like every book I've ever read or used in a class, when they come in and start talking about check boxes and radio buttons, it's got to be a pizza application. Everyone just seems like it does that. The picture box I mentioned before. All right? Typically, in a picture box, then you click the image property, and it's where you can put in a ping or a GIF, etc., or a JPEG. It typically is invisible until you actually put something in it. All right, and they go through all the steps for doing that right here. All right, adding a list box, a checked list box, and combo box controls to a form. The key thing to realize here is they have this items property. So when you want to add something, it's the name of the control.items.add. If you want to remove something, it's the name of the control.items.remove. You can also work with selected index. So if it's the first element, that'll return a 0. If there's no elements selected, it'll return -1. And you can actually put the value that was in there too, or all the values that were selected. So they go through an example here. Again, you can go in and click on collection, and you can manually put values in there. It's not normally done like that, but you can do it. All right, if indeed that's what you want to do. By default, only one item in a list box can be selected, but you can set it up for multi-extended and multi-simple. All right. The date time picker has become over time pretty popular, especially if you work at a place where they schedule appointments. It's much easier to do that. Now, in the example they have right here, it is just a date time picker. You can set it up with the date and the time, or I'm sorry, with the date here as is just shown here, or date and time. And they show you the different ways that you can format it here on page 572. Again, some of this stuff, it's like they talk about snap lines and whatever. We looked at that almost on day 1 in here. That's why I said a lot of the stuff that's in here is not new. All right. Understanding group boxes and panels. Just so you see this, again, I'm trying to show you this stuff to be complete. I'm going to remove all of this junk. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a group box. All right. So what is this? It's a control that's designed to hold other controls. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put 2 buttons in here. But I'm going to literally just drag them into here and drag that one into here. Boom. Nothing big. But notice when I grab the group box and I move it, all right, pretty obvious when you look at that how it is a container. All right. They also talk here about panels. I don't ever use panels. I just use group boxes because they've always done everything I've wanted them to do. Menu strips, again, I showed you how to use a menu. All right, you can create a menu in code, but it's much easier to just come in as you were shown. Come in here, find menu strip, drag it up to the top, let it go. Now we got a menu. I can go here and I can bring, I can go down, I can go over, etc. So I come in here and I say, file, exit, etc. That's how fast you can set up a menu. Some of the other controls they do mention, this is almost the end of the chapter, but you should be able to draw something like this on the screen and there shouldn't be any surprises for any of you. Most of the stuff they put in this chapter is like this. It's really simplistic in nature. Well, that's